Welcome to the Melanin Jelly Project Conversations, a podcast that celebrates diversity and representation in children's storytelling, entertainment, and edutainment. I am the host, Olunosen Louisa Ivaze. On this podcast, I chat with authors and creators of children's books, entertainment, and edutainment. This is also a collaboration with the Ottawa Black Book Club. Welcome again, Mary Roberts, the author of this lovely book. Tell me about yourself and what inspired you to write this lovely book, because I like it. It's light, it's easy.
So the book, in case you can't see, the book is called Georgia's Faraway Family. It's about a little girl who doesn't live in the same place as the rest of her extended family. So her grandparents, her cousins, her aunties and uncles. And it's about how she feels about that. So that when she has to leave them after visiting, she's, it upsets her and things like that. And then she goes to school and she has to do a project about her family. And she realizes that it is actually quite different to some of her friends' families who, they all live right beside the other children. So they see them all the time and it's quite different. And she realizes that the other children, while being different, are quite interested in her family and that it becomes sort of a positive thing. And then she goes home and she tells everybody about it, and it's sort of a sort of journey of acceptance for international families or families who are really spread out over the world. Maybe you would call them cosmopolitan families or global families. But basically, the world is a very small place now, and it's much smaller now than it was when I was a child. But I grew up I'm Irish, but I grew up away from Ireland for a lot of my childhood. And I remember that feeling. We had to call using the phone. There was no email, there was no Skype, there was no WhatsApp. So I had to call if I wanted to talk to my grandma, and we saw our family once a year. We were in Tokyo, which was very far away. And I remember that feeling. And now my children are growing up away from the Irish side of the family. We currently live in France, but we lived in Asia before. So they had the same experience. So I decided that I'd been working on this story for a while, and I decided that I read it to my daughter. And she was like, "Oh, that girl is just like our family." And it was kind of one of those things. And I was like, you know what, maybe I should try and share this with the rest of the world. Maybe this is something that other children could aspire, see themselves in as well. So I then started to sort of put it together properly and edit it properly. So Georgia's Faraway Family was sort of the brainchild of my own childhood, and then the childhood that my children are living now, and that a lot of children are experiencing now, whether they're away from all of their family or away from part of it, because we move around a lot more, and the world is very international. So that's why I wrote it, and I'm very proud of it. It's really beautiful. So
yeah, I like that you use the word everywhere family.
Yeah, so a family all over the world as well. In one of the pages, it's that because we when I was in Asia, they were really everywhere, and at one point my family were in 4 different continents, or 3 different continents, I think. So we really were that everywhere family, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still family and that you're still close and you can still have a relationship. So yeah, I'm sort of a big fan of that idea that family can be anywhere and home is not always one place, and that kind of thing. That's sort of how I grew up, and that's how I've always thought of it.
Yeah. And do you think that because the world is gradually becoming a global village, that it's redefined how we see families, and it's redefined family relationships and family ties? Do you think
so? Yeah, I think it probably has, but I think it probably was like that a little bit before. It's just that now our technology is so good that we're a lot more connected, even though we're even further away, which I think is totally different from the way it was, for example, when I was a child. When I was a child, you were far away, full stop. You were far away, you weren't super connected. It was wonderful to go home or to go back to whatever country you were going back to. Whether or not you thought of that as home was maybe different, but you would go back and you would stay the long summer, and then you would, go back to the other place that you lived. But you didn't see people much. Like I said, we had letters or phones. I think now the idea of having family far away is so much more normal and so much more just acceptable. And the relationships that you can have with family members actually are much easier maintained now than they were when I was a child, because of Zoom and Skype and WhatsApp that is free and that is accessible to most people. Now, not everybody, and that's obviously a thing to do with privilege as well, but it certainly is more accessible to the vast majority of people in comparison to the way it was before. And that helps a lot. You can maintain your relationships with your grandparents. The cousins can see each other, can see their faces, can see them as they grow up. And that's something we didn't really have when we were little. I guess that's the main thing.
I think that's very true, because growing up, I used to write letters to my grandfather, and it would take months because we lived in the north. We lived in the northern part of Nigeria, and my granddad was down south. So I would write him all these long letters, and it would take months for it to get to him. Did he ever write me back? Can't remember. But
I know I got cards and stuff, but like it definitely, we were in Asia and it was getting back to Ireland. Like same thing. It took months for anything to get anywhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting that even if pictures were posted to you, because when my friend started to move away after high school, I had this friend in India then who would write to me, and then she would send pictures. It would take months and months to get to me. And the interesting thing is, when pictures take months to get to people, those people don't look that way, like that anymore.
I think that's particularly true of children. It's particularly true of children, and since we are talking about children's books, by the time you got one of those photos, in fact, the child had grown 2 centimeters already. So it was not necessarily totally current, the news that you got. Yeah, and I mean, I'm not that old, but it did take time, and we did get email eventually, but my grandparents didn't have email. Like, they weren't connected even if we were, so they kind of remained where the rest of the family were not quite as accessible.
Mm-hmm. How important do you think it is for authors to tell these type of stories where children can see their unique family situations?
So I think that's really, really important, and I think that's actually why I ended up writing it, because my children are typical, they have no disabilities or anything, so they do see themselves in books that represent them. So that's to do with privilege and things like that. We have that, but the idea of representing a type of family is kind of a new thing, where certainly when we were growing up, there weren't books about different types of families, same-sex parents, children with disabilities, even multi-generational families living, with lots of people under the same roof. We actually didn't have books about that showed that, this is a thing, this is normal, this is just a different type of family. And that didn't really exist when we were children. Now it does, and that's amazing, and we all love that. So this kind of was like my tiny little addition to that, because I had never seen a book where it specifically stated that they either lived somewhere else, or that they were from, for example, the parents, it states in my book that the parents are from 2 different places, and that's my situation. We are from 2 different countries, and we actually met in a 3rd country and lived in a 3rd country until my first 2 children were born. So we had so many different contexts, and I had never seen that kind of thing discussed. But of course, if you live outside of your country, you do tend to go looking for other people who are living outside of their country, and the international communities are huge. In every country you go to, there's an international community, and those people have children who are living outside of one or both of their countries. So it was kind of, like you said, like you mentioned just there, it's kind of my way of showing that different kind of family. And I think representation for everything is important. I'm a speech and language pathologist in my day job, so I'm a big fan of representation for people with disabilities or differing abilities. And I think this is kind of a similar thing, perhaps a little bit less obvious, but important nonetheless, because we should be able to see our type of family on a page, and that's really important for identity. And identity for people of mixed origins can be something that is important to talk about, whereas if you're from just one place, you don't actually ever have to have that conversation. So the idea that you could show this to a young child and say, hey, look, this girl is like us, this family is like ours, I think that's really important. How do you think you can talk to children about this? Because some parents or some parents just feel, you're a child, you get used to it. But there are children who need a little help. I think children do get used to it, but I don't think that takes away the importance or the niceness of having some representation. So of course, I was not unhappy with the fact that I was living away from my family. I had a wonderful life. I loved speaking a different language, learning a different language. I loved where I was. For me, it was a positive experience. And for my children, it's a positive experience as well. But like I said, that doesn't take away the need for representation. And I think children are so astute, and we as humans are so programmed to look for difference, that if we speak 2 languages at home, for example, and people, when we go to Ireland, they will turn their heads when they hear children in a park that look just like them but don't speak English. My children might speak to each other in French, and I think it's those programmed, and children are very much programmed to look for difference. So I think it could start a really important conversation if a child was somewhere outside of their home country, if they were the ones who were, for example, expatriated and were maybe having a tough time adjusting if it was a brand new thing. This book could be something you could show to them and be like, look, there are other children like you. This family and this girl, they come from different places. Maybe they speak different languages. They're not all in the same place. They don't see their grandma, so they have to call her on Skype. Because I do talk about the technology and stuff in the book, that they call their grandparents on the computer, and that could be just an opening for children to see that it's a thing, and to be a little bit more, to make it just a bit more day to day. And that's important as well, to see yourself as other people and to see yourself as part of a group. And I think those are important conversations for children, and even young children can be part of those conversations. Even really young children can understand a lot of those concepts as long as they're pitched properly.
And what was your writing process like? Talk to us about that, because I remember when we had discussed this book, you had said it's 1,200 words.
Oh no, it's much less than that. Way less.
Oh,
way
okay.
less.
Okay.
I think it's less than 800. I think it's really short. It looks a bit longer.
After talking to you the last time, I went and reviewed some of the things I had written, and I was able to take them from 1,800 to like 900 words, which was great. But I felt, this isn't enough. But again, I was wondering, did it capture the story? So talk to us about your writing process. How do you tell what a good story?
Yeah. So this is a book for young children. This is a book from it's labeled from 3 to 7. I have had other children read it and really appreciate it as well. It's not like, but basically 3 to 7. So it is for young children, and it's actually designed to be read aloud, because obviously for the vast majority of children that age, they will be having books read to them. So actually this was a story that I wrote a long time ago. It was probably double the length, and significantly different. And when I decided, I read the longer version to my daughter, and when she had this moment with it, and it made me want to do something with it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do something with this. I'm going to look at it properly. So I started to edit it, and I did, and I really cut it down to what I thought would be best for that age range. Like I said, I'm a speech and language pathologist. I try to be aware of the levels of vocabulary and things like that. And I just, because it needed to be that length for a picture book, I was just kind of brutal with it. And I also had a friend who is she studied English, and she just has a really good eye for that kind of thing. She looked at it for once, and I think she'd had a really bad day. She sent me an email saying, like, sorry, I've had a really bad day. I've gone for the brutal edit. And I thought I had done a good job of slashing, and she just slashed left, right, and center. And I ended up keeping a lot of her edits. And it was just removals, like it wasn't adding anything. It was really just saying, like, don't need this, don't need this. This can be moved down, and it was really, really, it was really, really eye-opening for me. So yeah, the book actually is not that long. Now that said, also there's a hefty reliance on the pictures in this book. The pictures are beautiful, and I mean, I didn't draw them, so I can absolutely say that, but the pictures are beautiful. And so there is obviously a reliance on the pictures, and they show really well the story, and that helps. So you don't need so many words. I then, of course, I didn't mention before, but the book also exists in French because we are a bilingual family, and I live in France at the moment. So I then had to translate it, and that was a whole other job. I mean, it took me months. It took me months to translate it, because we don't use the same type of vocabulary in French for children's books. It's actually much more adult. They use quite difficult words, and they use quite flowery sentences. So their sentences tend to be longer and more complex, for a younger age than the Anglophone books that we would have for that age. So I had to sort of match the genre for the French book, and it ended up quite beautiful in French, but almost more lyric. So I had to sort of do everything twice, and then I was really glad it wasn't longer than it was, because the translation already took me so long. If I had to translate more, I would die. Okay. So yeah, it took me a lot of time, but the actual it was written quickly, but it took a lot of work afterwards to get it sort of right. And it went through a lot of hands after that, obviously, particularly for the French version. It had to be checked a lot of times.
Okay, because with bilingualism, growing up as a child who spoke more than one language, I realized that you get to experience life through different lenses.
Yeah, and the language you speak at the time, it does make a big difference, and it influences the way you think. Now, I'm a sequential bilingual. I learned my proper second language much later in life. My children are learning two together, and they kind of have two, not different personalities, but they have two different ways of interacting depending on which language they're speaking, which is really cool. And that also goes along with the thought. Now, I don't say it in the book, but obviously a lot of families that would relate to this book are bilingual. So, and I deliberately didn't say that she lived in a specific place either. We don't mention languages and I don't mention place, to make it sort of even more applicable to everybody, because she could be anywhere. She could speak any language. She could be in your country, that kind of thing. But yeah, it was a really interesting experience. The translation bit was tough, but it was a really, really interesting experience.
Okay, because in regards to translation, my books are also in English and French. And I was very surprised when someone said to me that there's a I just assumed that French was just like English. You just sit and you just write. And someone said to me, no, there's a standard French. Because I'm in Ottawa. Ottawa is a bilingual city, and the French spoken in Ottawa is a little bit different from the French spoken in Montreal, and it's a little bit different from Parisian French.
Yes, so French is slightly different, but it's I don't know how much difference there would be between Ottawa and Montreal, but there's a difference in quite a lot of the vocabulary, not the conjugation and the structures, but a lot of the vocabulary is quite different used in Canadian French, so that wouldn't necessarily match if you were gonna sell it here, for example. So yeah, there's quite a big difference. It's really, I mean, it was really interesting for me, and like I said, a lot of work, but it was really, really an interesting experience.
Okay, so what are some of the challenges you feel that authors encounter when trying to write for kids? Because I think your book is self-published, right?
Yes, so my book is self-published, as is my new book as well, and I think that was just for me, that was a choice because I wanted two things. One, I figured I've got time to do this now, I'm going to do it now. If I have to wait 6 years to get it picked up by somebody else, then perhaps I won't be in a place where I'm going to be able to do it anymore, and I already have a busy life, so I might as well do it. So I really just wanted to do it, so I did. The other thing is obviously total control, and I loved the fact that I could work so closely with the illustrator, which you just don't get in traditional publishing. You might get lucky, but a lot of people don't have a lot of control over that. So for me, I really loved the drawings. I loved the style of the illustrator, and I just was so happy then that I could have control over that with her, so that I could, it's so beautiful, so that we could talk about that, and that I would have the choice for those things, and I could do it on my time and things like that. It is a big challenge because obviously you put up the money for that, so that's the downside, and you have to do all your own work. I think most writers would agree that the biggest problem is marketing, because children's books, you can't market to your actual audience because they don't have any money.
Have any money, yeah.
So it's really hard, and I think everybody who has ever tried to do it recognizes that probably is the most difficult thing. So many people have great stories to tell. I think my story is lovely. I think it's relevant to huge amounts of people, but if they don't know it's there, then of course nothing will come of it. So I think that's the biggest challenge. It's certainly a challenge for me, and it's a challenge to most of the children's authors that I know or that I've interacted with, because we have to pitch to the parents where the parents are, and that can be quite difficult, because we should be discerning about what we buy for our children, and that makes it sort of extra hard when you can't always connect with people directly, or show them the book, or that kind of thing. So I think that's tough, and that's tough for a lot of people in this genre.
Okay. And how did you find your illustrator? Because I love it. I love her work.
Yeah, so I actually just looked. I mean, I kind of went online and looked for people's websites, and I just spent a lot of time trawling through things, and I found a few whose styles that I liked, and then I just contacted them directly. So her name is Mariam. She actually lives in Canada, but she is Iranian. So she read the story and she was like, "Oh, I have a faraway family too," because she had lived all over the place. She had even lived in France for a little while, and now she's Iranian but living in Canada as well. She's like, "Oh, I can so relate to this. I would love to illustrate this book." So actually, she also really enjoyed the story, and like I said, I had seen some of her illustrations on other things, and like you said, I mean, I think it's beautiful. I just loved the style. It really just worked, and she took a lot of the big decisions in terms of like, this was my first time at the rodeo, so she was like, "You want to pick stuff?" I was like, "Why don't you just show me what you think is good?" And so she picked the color scheme, which I adore, and when she showed me the sort of storyboard of how it was going to look, I had so little to change. I was like, wow, it's all perfect. There was only one page where I was like, wow, this page I don't like. And it was just one. The rest of it, it really looked like I had hoped it would look in my head. So that was also just lucky for me that I found someone who was, first of all, super easy to work with, and a style that I really enjoyed. So that was maybe lucky for me.
I think that's very important, finding someone that is easy to work with.
I think the interpersonal relationship between something, because it is quite personal. It's, it's a story that I wrote and that I'm proud of and that I want to make into a really good product as well, because books are a product. So, I want to make that into a good product so that other people will enjoy it too. So, I want to have pride in it. I want to have my mark on it, but it's not me that's doing the drawing. So having that connection with somebody where you feel like you can tell them exactly what you think, you can, you can have this open dialogue, and you're not like, "Oh, I don't want to offend this person, but I don't like that color." And there was none of that with Mariam. She was just awesome. Like really, really, she was awesome. So I really enjoyed that. And like I said, it might have just been luck that I stumbled upon someone really great. But it was a big thing for me. And same thing, there's always a deadline, and she was wonderful in terms of timing, and it just worked really smoothly. So that was lucky for me.
That's great. So how do you think that authors of diverse stories can support each other? How do you think we can support each other, especially as we're self-published?
So I think the main thing we should do is talk to each other and about each other. So I think as long as we're talking, then we're doing our best. We don't often have access to huge amounts of money or big advertising budgets. So what I usually tell people personally is, you like the book? Tell a parent. Tell another parent, because if you have this book for your child and you like it, the best recommendation for your book is going to come out of the mouth of the parent of a child like that. And I think the relationship between other authors of similar genres or similar themes is actually kind of similar. So if you come across somebody's work and you like it, tell somebody else. And I think the word of mouth thing for people like us who do rely on like that small publicity, because that's really all we have in terms of big, we don't have big budget. I think that talking about each other is really important. So I did it as well. Somebody contacted me right after I published the book to say, "Hey, your story is actually a little bit like mine. I wondered if you might want to do something together." And I was like, I am absolutely up for that. And she's a woman who writes bilingually. Now, my book is out in 2 separate editions. Her book is a bilingual book, so it exists in the 2 languages in one book, and it's in Greek and English. And it was a story about grandparents. And she said, "Look, why don't we put an interview together with both of us, and then we'll both publish it on our, I have a newsletter and things like that." And I thought it was a great idea, because that way we both get a little bit of extra eyes on our work. So I think between either self-published people in general, but really people who like you said, if you have somebody where you're like, oh, the theme is fairly similar, or we write in the same genre. I think just telling your listeners about somebody else whose work you enjoy personally is really important. Because if you enjoy my work, maybe you'll enjoy this other person's work that I've run into. And I think that's the big thing that we get out of each other. And then we keep the conversation going as well. And that's really important as well.
Okay, so what are some tips you can give to listeners? Because some people might be listening and wondering, oh, you know what? I want to write this kind of story about everywhere families. And Marie has done such a great job. What are some tips you can give aspiring authors on how to write such good stories and keep it under 1,000 words?
I think just write it first. Like I didn't necessarily go out. I've written hundreds of stories, but mostly only for my kids. I just write them and then I read them and then I put them away. Okay. You know, so I didn't actually go out to do it. I think just write it first. Whatever length it comes out, write it. But I definitely benefited from, the writers community say, kill your darlings, right? Don't be too attached to the sentences themselves as long as the ideas don't get messed up. So I think as long as you are willing to edit your work, then it probably will be better for it. But I don't know that I have that much advice, except that I think everybody has a story to tell. And I think because I'm a children's author, I usually go at it from the point of the viewpoint of the children. Children deserve to hear everybody's stories. So if you think you have a story to tell, write it. And you never know what will happen to it afterwards. But if you don't start, or you don't just get it down on a page, you'll do nothing with it anyway. I would just go for it. My other piece of advice is in terms of illustrators. And that's not actually to do with the writing, but I am a big fan of making a good choice in terms of illustrators. It's really an area where you get what you pay for. Because illustration is a very specific skill. It takes a lot of time, and if you look to do it on the cheap, you will get a less good product. And I think that when we are looking, I have 3 young children. If I am looking at a book, I'm not going to read the whole thing before I buy it, even if it's short. What I'm going to do is look at the pictures. Now, the story might be awesome, but if it doesn't look good, I'm a parent with limited time. I'm going to look at it first. So I think it's really something for us. It's worth considering, even if you think your story is the best story in the world. If it's not pleasing to the eye of parents and children both, then it's really probably not going to go very far in terms of people wanting to talk about it afterwards or picking it up as opposed to a different book in a shop. So I think that's really important, that picking an illustrator that matches you, but also the best product you can have is really important. And to pay properly for illustrations when they're really worth it, because it's such an important part of the industry.
I think, when you spoke about paying for good stuff, it made a lot of sense, because I remember that the previous works I had published, I had really good illustrators. Then I decided, you know what? Oh, illustrators are charging too much. I'm going to go cheap. So I found these 2. Really, really cheap. And I was so excited I had gotten a good deal. Sent off my work. One disappeared, never heard back from him. And then the second one, when he sent me the first draft, I draw better than he does. So
I think it's just so specific. Like, it's something I just cannot do. Yeah. And people should be paid for their work, but I think, which is for sure, people should be paid for their work. But if you want a quality product, it's really an industry where really good illustrators command a big-ish price, and they are absolutely worth it. Like, we should be paying for that product. But that's the other downside for the self-published among us. Obviously, we pay that up front, and that was a choice I made, and it's not a choice everybody can make. But I think for children's literature, it remains a very, very important thing to consider.
Yeah, I think because also I've also opened this podcast up to illustrators, because when I put out the call, I said I would like to chat with illustrators. So please, your illustrator Miriam Fazi.
Yeah.
Yes, if you can connect me with her, if she would like to come on this podcast, because I would really like to talk to a couple of illustrators. I want to know, Because I know that some of them, I see some rants where they rant that people don't want to pay them their worth.
I think that must be so disappointing for them, and it happens just all the time.
But again, a lot of authors don't understand what goes into illustration. That is another thing. A lot of authors.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we wait 3 or 4 months to have our pictures. It really takes time.
Yeah, someone was talking about paying $10 per spread. And someone said, what an insult. So yeah, please, if you can connect me with her, I would like.
Yeah, sure. I'll ask her.
Yes, ask her and talk to her, because I really like to hear an illustrator's viewpoint, and just for clarity also. So self-published authors understand what goes into illustration and what goes into delivery.
Yeah, sure. That would be great. I mean, she's awesome. I'm her biggest fan.
Okay.
So I will definitely ask her and see if I can put you guys in contact.
Okay, thank you. So what do you hope to see for your book? What do you hope to see from this book?
So for my book, I would love to see it in schools, and I would love to see it particularly in any kind of international or immersion school where you would have people who speak a lot of languages, because that's of course where you're going to have all your international people and your children who are from mixed nationality families, and I think that would really help. It would, I think the story can be appreciated by those types of children. So the big thing for me is I really would love to have it in a lot of schools where it could be accessed by children. But honestly, yeah, I mean, I'm already really proud of it. I love hearing when people send me pictures and saying, oh, they really appreciated it. They really got that it was like them. That's really important to me. So yeah, but I think if there was to have a big goal, to have the copies into schools where there are big international or very mixed communities, because I think those are the kids that will relate best to it, and that would be a really, really big thing for me if ever I managed to get it onto a curriculum or something for the younger children learning to read, or that would be like my dream come true.
Okay, great. So have you done any school visits?
I have. I've done a couple of school visits here. I've done some both in Ireland and here in France. I've even done one because my parents lived all over the world. I've even done a virtual visit for Book Week for a school in Lithuania where my parents lived at the time, and they read the book beforehand and everything. So yeah, I really enjoy it. I love listening to children. I'm a pediatric speech and language pathologist, so I mean, I spend my whole day talking to children, and I absolutely love doing stuff like that. And I think I really get something out of it, and the children really get something out of it as well. So it's something I really enjoy doing.
Okay, what are some good tips you can give us for good school visits? What are some tips as authors? Because I'm yet to do a school visit, so I like to ask authors, if I was going to do a school visit, what are some things I should know beforehand?
I think don't aim to say too much, particularly for really young children, because they really don't have a whole grasp of they get what a book is, and that they get that they're not always real, but they don't have a very great line between what is a real person and what is the person in the book. So you really have to go quite easy. So I always think whatever you think is the easiest way you can explain something, you should do that. My other thing is visuals. Particularly, my book is designed, like I said, from 3 to 7 year olds. It's designed for, lower primary, and they're very, very visual. So I actually have a new book out as well, with also beautiful illustrations, which is that one. And I've been doing visits. It's really nice, but I've been doing visits with this one, and I happen to have made up some of the spreads that the illustrator made for me in line drawing, like in a pencil. Line drawing when it had been properly finalized, and then colors. So I have the same 2 spreads in 3 different forms, and the kids just really love it. They get that you start something and you work really hard on it and it gets better, and this is the end product, and then you show them the actual page in the book. So I think to have some visual things where they get a little bit extra that you can pass them around and they can hold, I think that's always a massive plus for doing those kind of things in school, particularly for the younger end of the age spectrum. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about your new book.
So my new book is called Ivy's New Garden. So there it is.
Okay.
A different illustrator. You can see the style is very, very different.
Like watercolor?
Yes, exactly. They do look, they are watercolors. I'll see if I can show some of the internal ones as well. This girl is Brazilian. She's also fabulous. The style is just gorgeous as well. She lives in Brazil. The story is about a little girl who has, she has a special garden that she goes to, but she's not really allowed to go there, and it actually gets closed down to be renovated because it's kind of dangerous. And she's really upset, really, really upset. And she goes through all the normal emotions that children go through, which is being mad and then being really sad about it, and kind of comes out the other end, realizing that, okay, it's not the same. So it has changed, but it's not bad. And I think that's a really, like I said, for my speech and language therapy, we often have kids who have difficulty understanding the notion of change, and it does really upset them. And we're always telling kids, it's okay, it's going to be fine, never mind, don't be upset. And that really bugs me. And it's so hard not to say that as a parent. I still catch myself saying it. So this book was kind of, for me, a way to show, like, you can be upset, you can be mad, you don't have to like the change, but change isn't always bad. So it might work out okay, but you can still feel all those things. And that was kind of my way of getting around that. And it's also, like I said, completely different style, but also a very beautifully illustrated book. And I'm also really proud of it.
Okay, I look forward to chatting with you about that book.
Yeah, sure.
I love the illustration already.
But yeah, it's really beautiful. It really is.
Yeah. So please, would you like to read your book to us?
I would love to. Okay, so I will show like that. And the book is called Georgia's Faraway Family. I'll try and show the pictures, but I'll show after. Georgia loved where she lived. She had a lot of friends. So did her little sister, Jade. Her parents liked their jobs and their city. Life was good. But Georgia was from somewhere else. Being from somewhere else meant that Georgia's family was a little different and quite far away. Most of Georgia's friends had their extended families living all around them. Olivia had both sets of grandparents living right in their city. Benedict had 2 uncles and 2 aunts living nearby too. Laura had 3 cousins on her very own street, just 4 houses away. She got to play with them all the time. Magnus' parents were from a different city, so they all had to drive for 2 hours to see his extended family. It was still the same country though. Georgia didn't have that. Georgia's parents were both from different countries, and that made their family unusual. Lots of people in Georgia's family were all over the world. They all lived in different countries. One of Georgia's grandfathers lived in Japan. She usually saw him once a year, but they did loads of calls on the computer. He always sent the most beautiful books as presents for her birthday. He never forgot. Georgia's other grandparents lived in Canada. They were working there. She saw them a few times a year, and they called often as well. They thought she and Jade were the greatest girls on earth. Georgia's grandma told her that all the time. Georgia had an aunt living in England and was impatient to go on a special trip to see her. Her aunt talked to her as if she was almost a grown-up. Georgia loved that. The last people on Georgia's everywhere list were her uncle, aunt, and new baby cousin Maddox. They lived in Ireland. Her uncle told the world's funniest jokes, and Georgia knew she was going to be the best big cousin ever to Maddox. She would see them at Christmas time. She couldn't wait. With all those places and the space in between, Georgia didn't see her family all the time like her friends did. Saying goodbye at the end of every visit was difficult and always made her sad. Then something happened.
This is one of my favorite pictures.
It's my favorite picture too. In school, Georgia's class were told they would have to talk about their families as part of a big project. The children then had a week to prepare a family tree and think about what they would say. At her desk in her room, Georgia carefully drew her family tree and wrote all the names. Then she added something. Under every name, she wrote the place where that person lived. She even coloured the tree beautifully to go with all the names. She looked at her work and was proud of it. When Georgia got up to speak in class, she was a little nervous, but soon she had a huge smile on her face. Her classmates were curious and interested in hearing more. Her friends asked a lot of great questions. Some of them had never travelled outside of their own country, and they thought Georgia's family was extraordinary. When Georgia got home, she was in a wonderful mood. Over dinner, she told her parents and Jade about what her friends had said. Then she called her grandparents and told them too.
Nice.
When she went to bed that night, Georgia lay thinking about all the members of her family spread across the globe. Though she still missed them all, she thought about how she loved them and how they cared for her even from so far away. Georgia fell asleep, picturing all the love travelling around and around the world, all thanks to families that were a little bit different, like hers. And that's the end.
Thank you so much, Marie. Marie Roberts, once again, is the author of this lovely book, Georgia's Faraway Family. And so for people who want to buy your book, where can they find your books to buy?
So you can find it on Amazon, which I presume the links will be below the video. So you can get it on Amazon in either French or English for the paperback. There is a special edition hardback which can be got from me directly, particularly in case it's good for schools and libraries, because obviously it holds up that little bit better. That's the edition that I was reading just there. It's really very beautiful. So if people wanted that, or if they wanted multiple copies, for example, for schools, there's a discount for that, and they can contact me directly at the email for the books, which will probably also be below the link. Yeah, so that's where they can be bought.
Okay, are you on Instagram?
I'm not actually, which I should be, I know, but I have so many other things to do, a full-time job and 3 children, so I'm not. I do have a Facebook author page if anybody's interested in that. I do have that, but other than that, I don't have anything else at the moment.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you for having me.
All right, do have a great day.
You too, bye.